Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I am talking today to General A.K. Bardalai. He has a very interesting background. General Bardalai had a long and distinguished career. A large part of his career was spent working in the United Nations, and especially in the United Nations peacekeeping forces. I invited General Bardalai to have a conversation with me because he's recently written a very interesting paper. His paper argues that because of some of the structural flaws in the UN system, the UN is not being able to respond comprehensively and cohesively in times of crisis, especially, for instance, he points out in the Gaza war. Now, this, many of the viewers and listeners of Global Order will remember that this is a theme that we talk about often on this platform, the need for reform in the UN system. To discuss all that, General Bardalai, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Hindol. Thanks for inviting me.
I want to begin by talking about your paper, which I just alluded to. One of the interesting points you make about in your paper is the inadequacy of the UN response in times of crisis and conflict because of structural problems. One of the points you make in your paper is something called the penholder system. Now, many people outside the UN system would not be familiar with this term or phrase. Could you explain to us what this is and why this has become a problem?
Yeah, to begin with, you would know that Hindol, even United Nations was born to replace the League. So it was expected to fill up the gaps and what the League of the Nations could not do it. And accordingly, I think the UN Charter, which was signed by almost all the countries, I think 50 members that time, it was ratified later. Now, Charter itself gives out very clearly the preamble, principles, and purposes. Now, since it has been signed by all the countries at that point of time, it is a kind of multilateral convention. But in fact, it can be considered as a constitution of the United Nations. It gives out the procedures, purposes, how to act. And it has listed out 7 purposes of the United Nations. Out of that, the first one, and not the first and most important one, is in maintaining international peace and security. And responsibility for this is of the United Nations Security Council, which is one of the organs of the United Nations. Now, the Security Council itself first has to identify, what is the threat to the international peace and security. And it is not very easy because, what you think that is not a threat can tomorrow become a threat to international peace and security. To give an example, any internal conflict, unless control addressed on time, it can spill over to a regional conflict, then it can become an international conflict. But the Kofi Annan in 2008 in a panel, they have listed out generally 6 clusters that can form a threat to international peace and security. However, having said that, when a threat is brought to the notice of the Security Council, it is supposed to discuss, debate, and take a decision. Now, here comes the problem. Because any decisions taken by the Security Council is hostess to 2 things. One is the P5 members, second to the member states. I'll come to it later why it is a member states. Firstly, the P5 members. Now, the Article 27 of the Charter stipulates that any decision which is to be taken by the Security Council must be ratified by 2/3 majority and no negative vote by the permanent P5 members. So therefore, the P5 members, based on their own security interest, if they wish, they can allow the draft resolution table in the Security Council to be passed, If they do not want it, they will not allow it. They can veto it. And more importantly, when any of the P5 members either directly or indirectly involved in the continuation of the conflict. Ukraine is a glaring example. Russia is one of the parties to the conflict. Now, what happened is that now, after this is discussed in the Security Councils, supposing they agree to pass a resolution, the resolution process itself, they call it, is not that simple. What they do, there is no ratified procedure with the Security Council how a resolution is adopted. Now, they have a unofficial tradition known as a pen holder system. This system came around 2008 and 9 and formed up sometime in 2010. Now, in this system, what happens? The three P5 members, namely USA, France, and UK, they have given the right to themselves to be the pen holder. That means, depending on the country's strategic interests, they take the lead to initiate the process. The country, whichever the lead nation, they will make the initial draft first, they themselves. Then the first circulate among the balance of the P3 members. Suppose the USA does it, after they make a draft, they will circulate to France and UK. Obviously, they may or may not agree. Some changes will take place, some compromise would have been taken place. So second, a third draft will come out after the P3 agrees. After that, they will circulate it to balance of the P5 members, the left to it, Russia and China. After they agree, whatever changes has taken place or amendment has taken place. So by the time you would realize that whatever draft has come out, it would have been a compromise draft in a very clear cut. Now, only after that, what happens? They circulate it to the remaining 10 non-permanent members of the Security Council, and giving them hardly any time to discuss and debate. Now, the system is not changed, but slowly and slowly what happened there, they have allowed some other countries, not very important issues, to take the lead, but not very important. But when the important issues come up, one of the nations take the lead. So unless the system is changed, this is an unofficial tradition, but I believe that I think it is going to change. But even if it changes, point is that P5 members continues to hold the power to veto a resolution. So if they do not want, for instance, so far as per the record is concerned, until now, 320 vetos are known to be recorded. Out of that, about 253 pertains to the international peace and security. And of course, the different countries have different figures. And after Hamas attack, you would know that how many times that draft resolutions were vetoed, not allowed to be passed. Finally, USA decided the resolution to be passed, that is 2728, by abstaining it. This is the so-called pen holder system. So people feel that if you change the system, changing the system itself is difficult. That means you have to amend the charter. To amending the charter, again, you have to go to the Security Councils and it will be put to vote. And no countries, the P5 countries, are likely to agree to it. That is one. Second, alternative is people thought that why not increase the number of the non-permanent members? Basically, maybe from 10, initially it was 6 to become 10. I do not know how it is going to make any difference, except that maybe political say will be slightly more. So unless the changes in structure is in the veto system or Security Council structure is changed, the procedure, I think it will be difficult to get through to any resolution. That is only one part.
We'll come to the next part in one moment, but when you talk about the next part, could you also address, and this is what you mentioned in your paper, Talk to us a little bit about where you think the system failed to act properly when the Gaza war crisis happened and is perhaps still failing to act adequately. Why do you think that the Gaza war, for instance, is a stark example of the failure of the system to respond adequately to a real crisis and conflict?
Okay. Presuming that, before that, I want to give you another prelude. Presuming that there has been consensus, I mean, hypothetically, all P5 members agrees, and 2/3 members also agree, there's no veto, and they allow a Security Council resolution to be adopted. That's the first challenge, that they have adopted the resolution. Now, that does not mean adopting the resolution is a threat to international peace and security is mitigated. The challenge is that how to implement that, the resolution. Taking a very, very simple example, like any peacekeeping operations, once peacekeeping operations or peacekeeping mission is approved by the Security Council, they get deployed. After they get deployed, what happened? The peacekeeping mission itself faces several challenges at strategic and operational level. Now, some of the challenges are beyond the control of the peacekeeping missions. They just cannot do anything about it. Now, I mentioned earlier that hostess to the member states, that decision-making process. Why I said this was, even if you take that peacekeeping operations have been, a peacekeeping mission has been deployed, and it is on place, and challenges are there. Now, what happened when it comes to implementing? Now, United Nations does not have any peacekeeping force directly under the command of the United Nations. So therefore, what happened? Once Security Council approves the resolution, the Secretariat, that is Secretary General's office, have to look towards the member states, telling them the look, now deployed or approved, please contribute your troops. Now the troop contributing countries, when they agree to deploy their troops, those troops are not directly under the command of the UN headquarters. There continues to remain control. They belong to the troop contributing countries. They are only operational control. So whenever a country decides to contribute the troops, they will take into consideration the strategic interest of the country. I'll go back in time and give you a simple example. If you recall, in 2000, there was a crisis in Sierra Leone. That RUF rebels were there. A lot of peacekeeping contingents were surrounded. And I recall I was those days in Delhi Army headquarters looking after, as a colonel, the peacekeeping operations. What had happened was, you must have heard about that journalist Syed Naqvi. He had made a documentary on Sierra Leone and he screened it. I also was present. Even then, Raksha Mantri George Fernandez was present. And by the time, 2-3 Indian peacekeepers died while operating against the RUF rebels. At the end of the movie, one old lady got up, must be around 65, 70. She asked a question to the Raksha Mantri, the Honorable Raksha Mantri, please tell us, what is the strategic interest of India to participate in far away in African country with her troops, and you have to sacrifice our own soldiers? I distinctly remember that. And he was honest to accept and stated that, well, I did not look into it. But since you have asked me, I will go back and look into it. What happened thereafter? Among other reasons, India decided to pull out of that. What I'm trying to say that a country always wants to participate when the strategic interest is there. And second is that when you participate, especially either chapter 6 or chapter 7, it may happen that you may have to resort to force. When you use force against the armed groups, obviously it will be retaliated and there could be fatal casualties to your own troops. And this becomes very difficult to the troop contributing countries because they are answerable to their domestic constituencies. With this example, that's why I'm trying to tell you that countries there basically remain hostess to the troop contributing countries. And what happened once even peacekeeping troops are deployed, most of the countries, they have the unwritten caveats. They start dictating terms. Do that, don't do that. These are not written. Coming to Gaza. Okay, before that, let me give you a reference. It'll be easier for you to understand. Talk about Ukraine a little bit.
Yes, certainly.
Ukraine, what happened, that if you recall, actual invasion took place in, I think, 22nd February of 2022. If you go back in time, exactly 1 year before the exact or actual date of invasion, that is on 21st February 2021, the Russia dropped paratroopers outside the Ukraine border. Since then, for 1 year, European nation and most of the countries were shouting and making hue and cry, stating that invasion is going to take place very soon. They have been shouting. But I find it very difficult to believe that 1 year was not enough to assure Putin that Ukraine will not join NATO, so that NATO troops will not come towards Russia, and to assure Ukraine that Russians will not attack you. And I fail to believe, maybe I believe that some people want it. I think most of the European nations, because they're directly affected, they don't want it. But some other countries, I don't want to name it, I mean, very easy, because their own interest, I think it was an opportunity for this, like a country, organization NATO to come to limelight, kind of thing. And also, I would not refrain from saying that a business interest, arm industry start flourishing, Anyway, that's the Ukraine part. But as far as Gaza is concerned, I think it came as a big surprise. Hamas attacking. Although there are enough, I think, good scholars and academics written earlier that it can happen anytime. But after having that happen, I do not blame anyone for it, because it really came as a big surprise that Hamas attacking them. What Security Council or international community could have done it, at least bring the conflict to an end. I can understand, emotions are running high, and I would also not like it or accept it the way Hamas attacked. Fine. And given, I can understand that some of the countries had indirectly give some kind of room for maneuver space to Israel, because they are answerable to their own people to take retaliatory action. But how much and how far? If you notice, in the beginning, entire world opinion was in favor of Israel. Now today, except for maybe 2 countries, they are also changing tracks. Entire opinion has gone against Israel and in support of the innocent civilians of Gaza. Only that much has happened. Now, coming to prevent. Now, how do you prevent Israelis from attacking Palestinians? Okay, one way, you have some instruments or levers that cause them that they're forced to, pull back. I do not know how many countries have got. I feel the only country that have the power is the United States of America. I would say non-use of lethal power. That is one. Second is that, of course, one way of stopping them is by use military force. Now, firstly, it took so long for the Security Council resolution to be passed, that is 2728, and American abstained. Abstaining, giving a signal that enough is enough, we are not supporting you, better stop. But they could have done it by not abstaining. But I think abstaining is one, but being part to it, allowing it to pass is another thing. So what happened is that I talked about that first challenge obstacle is to get one resolution approved. Second, bigger challenge is to how to implement it. Now this Security Council resolution has been approved. Nothing has happened. He has delayed the Rafah operation only by maybe a month.
Let me ask you a question here, sir. People who look at it from the Israeli point of view would argue to this argument, saying, yes, it is indeed true that the US and other countries could have pressurized Israel, in a sense, not to conduct operations further beyond a particular limit. But that becomes hard to do because the community has not been able to get the Palestinian side. Bill Clinton famously said that he did all he could to ensure that a two-state formula comes into being, but somehow the Palestinian side would not agree, and therefore, despite repeated instances, it couldn't happen. So therefore, the community hasn't been able to pressurize the Palestinians to come to the table and finally thrash out a deal, because and they would say that because there is an inherent belief among the Palestinian side that from the river to the sea, so to speak, everything will be Palestine. So because of that failure, there is a sort of domino effect failure to stop Israel beyond a particular point. We seem to be trapped in a rather vicious cycle. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Hindol, I agree with you, but there are two elements to it. The first part is that some of these organizations, like Hamas, Houthis, and Hezbollah, they have their own principle. The reasons of survival is on something else. For instance, I'll talk of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is accepted now government of Lebanon as resistance army because Hezbollah has been proclaiming and telling the citizens of Lebanon that only we are the organization which can defend the borders of Israel. Now, over a period of time, they have become powerful. They have become bigger part in the government. Now, would they allow this power to go away? The power will go away if the solution is found. So answer is obvious. Same is the case with Hamas. Okay. So yes, logically they said that we have to get our land back. But unofficially, it is in the interest of the Hamas, the conflict must continue.
And this is exactly the argument we hear from the other side, right? In 2005, when Israel moved out, you would know this better than other people. Israel moved out, even the tombs were removed, if you remember, because there was a withdrawal. And the first thing that happened was Hamas brought down even the greenhouses that had been built to grow food for the Palestinians. So, like I said, it's a rather vicious sort of cycle that has been trapped. And the UN is not being able to break this in any way, sir. Talk to us a little bit about why this impasse continues and why this breakthrough cannot happen.
I think it will be amount to going into too much of history into it. I may not be the correct person to say that, but in the layman's word, I will try to explain to you. Mere fact that it is in the interest of Hamas for the war to continue in different form. And when you say that Hamas has to agree completely with Israelis, that means we are looking for a conflict resolution. I don't think the conflict resolution is that easy. But what I am referring to you now, while the conflict resolution is the far distant dream, at least we should look for some kind of space and time, even if we call it status quo. The people can at least continue to fight or kind of animosity, at least they come to survive. We are actually, UN is looking for that. And I think while the conflict resolution is very difficult for the historical reasons, and I'm quite pessimistic about it that is going to take place, but I believe that some conflict resolution management is still possible, that you kind of fine, you can keep discussing about this issue once in a while, let it for that action will continue to take place. At least not the kind of war which is going to take place now. And that is where I think UN comes in and international community comes in, and it can be done only firstly by the parties to the conflict, and they will also agree. But point is that what can pressurize, what is the power, who has the power to convince Netanyahu? I think Hamas never expected that kind of retaliation from the Israel side. That's why if you feel that Hamas always gives indication we're ready to talk, and whatever conditions they lay down, these are cited as conditions not acceptable to Israel. But what is the power that can control Netanyahu? And I don't have any doubt that only country which can convince Netanyahu in whatever leverage they wanted to use it is the United States of America. Now here it comes the big political issues. Election is coming in USA. Big Israeli lobbies are there. There are divided opinion. Will President Biden take the chance of forcing? He has done, I think, looking up to the election, which is, I think, month of October election. Am I correct?
That's right.
I think he's trying his best as much. Now, one of the harshest comments I have heard from the vice president and the president in the month of March, and also unofficial, I think it is leaked to the press that I think Netanyahu feels that Biden is actually indirectly trying to engineer a coup. And two will be surprised that I have few Israeli friends. I was surprised. They're quite more. They said enough is enough. Please, we want our hostess back. They never said that stop this war. Obviously, it means that if you want the hostess to be back home, you have to stop the war. But what can stop Netanyahu? Either he, I think, falls sick, or he loses his election, or he's forced to step down. But moments he steps down, what is going to happen? I think noose will be around his neck, because I think people are gunning for him because a lot of corruption charges. So his survival is based on continuation of the war, like the Hamas survival is based on continuation of the war, maybe a bit in a lesser degree.
Let's talk a little bit as we come towards the end of our conversation. Let's go back to the UN. You explained in rather, in detail the problems in the UN structure that prevents this kind of, conflict resolution, or at the very least, conflict stopping, should I say, stopping of extreme conflict. And those are all structural problems. Now, we know that there is an urgent case for reform in the United Nations. Many major countries, and especially India is, increasingly making the case that the fact that India is not among the permanent members of the UN Security Council is a huge gaping, sort of hole in the system. Talk to us a little bit at the end on what kind of immediate, urgent reform is required in the UN system to ensure that a more holistic and a more equitable approach to this sort of conflict resolution comes into pass.
My voice opinion is slightly radical. Proponents of reform, they talk about firstly that country like India, who is actually becoming the leader of the global south, have done enough, rightly so, along with many other African nations, should have the right place in the high table. They're difficult. I know that all of us know. The first reform took place in August 65 when non-permanent members, a number of the non-permanent members increased from 6 to 10. Thereafter, during Kofi Annan, he made a sincere effort to change the structures. They had given 2-3 different models, increasing the permanent member, non-permanent members, or permanent members, they make it from P5 to maybe P10 without veto power, with veto power. But, nothing went beyond, except for the rhetoric by friends of India and all these countries who have been suggesting, like America, we feel that India is the most, eligible nation to get. But when it comes to actual voting and all, they will never do that. That is one part. So second part is that, yes, reform is a must. Now, what will happen? Supposing, let's take at minimum today is number of members in the Security Council 15. Okay, that is 10 plus 5. Decision-making process is still with 5. Supposing we increase the number of Security Council members, non-permanent members, say 10 to figure 15, hypothetical figure. How does it make any difference? Whenever they want it, I'm not talking of crisis like Gaza or Ukraine, because a smaller number is easier to take a quick decisions. That is one. The bigger the number may be more difficult. Then, can they make any changes? Now I am coming to the point. Even if you remove that veto power, even if you take away the veto power, hypothetically, that people have agreed to change or reform the Security Council, which becomes the buzzword, a flavor of the day when crisis takes place, even the veto power is taken away, that P5 members cannot veto. They allow the resolutions to be approved, passed. What about the power outside the Security Council? Today, everybody knows, I said that by abstaining from the Security Council Resolution 2728, United States of America has given a signal to Israel, a better change, mend your ways. On the other hand, it continues to support. If you continue to support from outside the Security Council, do you think there's any power in the world who can stand up to United States of America? So my view is that unless there's a power which can stand up to the big powers and pose a kind of a challenge, a deterrence, these countries will continue to rule the geopolitics or geopolitical dynamics or the security scenes from outside the Security Council. You just cannot do anything about it. I've given you the example. Even, for example, Ukraine war. Suppose Security Council resolution was stable, a draft resolution. Russia decides to abstain. China also decides to abstain. How do you implement the resolution? Would you have another world war? No. So you got to have a deterrence. And my views are that's fairly radical. But only thing what happens that when you carry out reform, number of people are more. I think that the collective voice, strength of the collective voice is better and better. The mere fact that even if has not been able to bring an end to the Gaza crisis, like I said, continuously talking about voicing the opinion of the misery of the suffering of the population in Gaza. I think today, international community has been able to come to a stage that entire world is in favor of the Gaza population, so much so that South Africa has dragged Israel to the International Court of Justice. And latest news that I heard, I believe they are planning to issue an arrest warrant. Whether it will happen or not, what will be the implication, I really do not know. Implementation is a problem. And I also heard latest news that Egypt is contemplating also join hands with South Africa. That means maybe one day the collective opinion, world opinions become so strong and so strong that maybe because of the political pressure that the P5 will crumble and allow the reform to take place.
That's absolutely a very interesting perspective, General Bardalai. You just mentioned Egypt, and maybe we'll conclude on this note. The interesting thing is the dichotomies within the global system, isn't it? On one hand, you're absolutely right. There is news that Egypt might join South Africa in sort of trying to persecute Israel. On the other hand, there's simultaneous news that a whole range of Hamas tunnels connecting between Hamas territories and Egypt has been found. And to top up that irony, those tunnels, many of them are occur simultaneously to a terrible wall that Egypt has made to prevent a single Palestinian to come in and seek refuge. Look at the hypocrisy of the international system, in a sense. I mean, one can only, almost in dark humor smile at this. And last comments from you on this very strange, very dark, and very strange situation, sir. You have seen this up close, more than most other people. Very dark, very strange situation. Last comments on especially this Egypt conundrum.
Hindal, I will just, okay, one more line I would like to add. What you said is correct. I think Egypt has to decide or will decide depending on what is its red line. That is one. And that comes a strategic interest. Second point, the famous book, Captains and the King. The author says, the politicians and businessmen are the one who profit the most out of a crisis. I leave it at that. I think it is very easy to understand.
General Bardalai, thank you very much. Like we were saying, it's an extremely difficult situation. For many people in Gaza, it's a difficult situation in the world order, and of course, when you see colliding political, geostrategic, and business interests coming together, it makes for a very dark situation. But as you said, and I don't think it's that radical. A real reform in the UN system is now absolutely urgent. Thank you very much, General, for spending time with us. Thanks for your insights.
Thank you. Thank you so much.